Hey guys, so in this video, I'll be covering the main marketing and sales growth challenges that most service companies are experiencing in the B2B sector that you might be experiencing as well, and how we can solve that together using our scaling process. Most companies, if you've ever noticed, they don't necessarily have a growth problem. They're faced with a scaling problem. Okay, so they'll try more ads, they'll try to increase the number of outreach on a daily basis or on a weekly basis, depending on the size of their teams, and they're going to hire more people to match that level of growth without remaining profitable over the long run, right? Now, the problem is without the proper infrastructure to support that growth, it's just going to create more complexity and more chaos down the line, and nobody wants this, right? So over the last few years, we've built a structured scaling process designed to do one thing and one thing only, which is to systematically double a company's client base within 4 to 6 months. And the way we do that, if you take a look at most commonly, the companies are making between 100K to 500K in yearly revenue. They're going to be leveraging and scaling their current resources at hand within that same organization purely horizontally, right? And that's by nature. So instead of, technically speaking, instead of increasing their profit per customer, they'll simply be focused on driving and chasing more clients, more revenue in terms of the top line, right? So their focus will be on more hires, more clients, and running more ads. Then that's going to increase the complexity instead of focusing on a much more simplistic approach. Now, if you take a look on the other side of the room, we have our vertical progress approach. Most of the companies that focuses on this are much more focused on capitalizing on their current resources. They try to become much more capital efficient and making more per dollar instead of acquiring more of these resources at hand. So for example, instead of adding more to their daily activities, they simply focus on retaining more at the bottom line, which means more profit. Okay, so again, they focus on direct improvement and profitability of their daily activities, their teams, their trainings, their processes, their workflows, their campaigns, and their sales process. One of the main examples we can say is you've probably seen, especially in the agency space, if we talk about a B2B sector, most agencies will be trying to focus on acquiring and spending more capital to acquire more clients. You're going to try to focus on specifically designing their entire sales process to decrease their cost per lead, decrease their cost per acquisition, without making sure how can I simply improve my customer lifetime value per customer? How can I make sure that I retain more client without necessarily focusing on allocating my resources on the next client, on and on and on. So, and you've probably seen the same approach by one of the most well-known entrepreneurs in the space, Alex Hormozi, 250 million hold company, acquisition.com, and Alex Baker, who sold his last SaaS, Hyros, an ad tracking business at $110 million, right? Now, when it comes to the main constraints to remove, first of them is really about decreasing the time that is required to generate, qualify, nurture, and convert those leads into paying clients, especially at the start of the brand, because most of the time what's going to happen is the narrative won't be as consistent and present as it can be across all of its social media profiles and content strategies. Secondly, we want to increase our lifetime value per client, meaning we want to add more recurring download revenue, and that is mainly contingent based on our offer or end pricing model, right? Because especially if you're in the consulting or the consulting business, what's going to happen here is most of your services are contingent based on your time or simply on a transactional based service, meaning your outcome or your income, if you talk about specific metrics, is mainly dependent on how much time you invest into the client, right? You basically want to remove yourself from this entire one-on-one basis, or the client if he's willing to pay more and more and more, right? Hence the level of the value ladder and so on. That's another topic for another time. But basically the goal here is to make sure that you have more predictability down your entire sales process. Third part, we want to decrease our cost per lead and our cost per acquisition, because at the start, the more you invest, the ratio is going to be asymmetrical on a negative basis, right? Unless you have hit a great proper traction right from the start, you have a proper tracking system to focus on the right tools, the right strategy, the right angle in your entire marketing campaign. Well, most of the time what's going to happen is for a specific short period of time, your cost per acquisition is just going to rank higher, right? Until you've hit the barrier to actually be profitable and then reinvest properly into a new angle, what's going to happen is you want to decrease that as soon as possible. And following this point, your cost of fulfillment should follow the same analogy, meaning you want to make sure that the quality of your service actually increases over time while the satisfaction of your client remains the same or is higher and higher and higher. So the overall objective here is simply about getting exponential results for less effort. Now, the solution, and if you think about and extrapolate this entire system across all other industries, it remains the same. Our process is used across all our portfolio companies, inside and outside the firm, for even our partners. And it is designed to cover all major stages of a company's funnel, inside in and inside out. Okay, so the first phase is about making sure that you have established authority. And the way we do that is by top tier media coverage. So press release, feature, articles, Google Knowledge Panel. We want to make sure that you have the proper status, credibility, and established authority whenever people look up your name online. The way we do that is we're leveraging AI tools as well. So you might have heard of the term generative engine optimization, but basically our goal here is all of the articles and the online media presence that we've been leveraging for your own brand, or categorically speaking, even for yourself as a business owner, is that ChatGPT or Perplexity could be retrieving those articles back to the search that the prospect might be seeking for you. And on the third part, we want to focus on organic SEO. Now, you might have heard that SEO is very common. And one thing we've noticed across all of the campaigns is, depending on the level of that same campaign, it's technically mostly under leverage. So many agencies, they're going to be trying to focus on purely, oh, I'm going to push one article, I'm going to push on simple one angle to push one specific narrative for the brand, and I'm going to try to improve the quality of the perception of that brand. But the problem is they're only going to be focusing on one specific avenue across all of the channels that's available at their disposal, where we can simply focus on having 5 to 10 different articles that are going to make sure that the narrative is being pushed constantly to engineer that perception properly. And on top of that, having that brand equity and that mental availability being reinforced much more rapidly, right? So a few examples here. Now, on a side note, it's very important to remember that press and media coverage in and of itself is much more about a conversion mechanism rather than a direct traffic source engine. We recommend the brands to leverage those articles depending on the stage of your funnel. So technically speaking, at the top and at the middle of your funnel. So your website, do you have any pieces of content that is strategically presented to your audience? And how do you make sure that those assets are being converted as high as possible? Right? So you could use it if you have any corporate profile through LinkedIn, or if you have any documentation around the way your process is, you could put that there, right? Has seen is Forbes, has seen in Business Insider, Yahoo Finance, on and on and on. The same goes for entrepreneur, right? And the second part, which is where everything basically comes in hand, the complete growth marketing infrastructure that's going to be covering the inbound and outbound avenues is automatically automated, and that's where most of the results come from. So one of the main conversion infrastructure benefits that we will be focusing on, we want to focus on 500 plus daily outbound DMs fully handled, 2 full-fledged appointment setters or SDRs, 10 to 20 appointments on a weekly basis that are consistent across the entire time period, 1 full-fledged HTS closer, high ticket sales closer, and finally 2 operators and specialists on the fulfillment side, right? As I mentioned before, we don't want to decrease the quality of our service. We want to make sure that that quality remains the same or is greater than before, while remaining the satisfaction of our customers as high as possible. Following the previous point, it's important to extrapolate the entire narrative across all of the sequences in your entire sales process, okay? So if we talk purely about either outreach or ads, it doesn't really matter. The level of exposure that your brand currently has is going to impact a lot on your current client acquisition. Okay, so let's say, for example, we purely talk about outreach here. If, for example, you have the best offer in the world, it's been tested across other maybe paid ads, direct channels, but your cost per acquisition and cost per lead remains the same. It remains high, right? If we apply the same principle to your direct outreach, you're sending maybe 100, 150 messages a day per account. And what's happening is your reply rate, it sucks. It's maybe below 5%. Let's call it 5. Now, the key essential point to remain conscious of is, regardless of the profitability of your offer, regardless of the effectiveness of your offer, if your brand is not properly presented across all of your social media profiles and the narrative is not consistent, your response rate is going to drastically plummet. Secondly, we want to have a structured authority content and conversion assets with at least 80% conversion target. And how do you structure and optimize your content in a way that people want to listen to you when they face your profile? So for example, do you have any proper VSL? How do you structure it? How do you structure your short form content? How do you structure your long form content? What's your hook? What's your body? What's your text? How do you reward your viewer from watching your content and engaging with your page? So regardless of the revenue or the sales reports, the primary goal should always be to focus on measuring the effectiveness of that campaign first, right? Because the gaps between, or at least the discrepancies between the benchmarks, the targets, and the actual results, going to tell you much more about what to look out for. And on the third phase, we want to ask ourselves, how can we make the brand that we have more durable, more sustainable, and much more powerful than it currently is? And the way we do that is primarily to scaling a team of 8 players, right? So basically, how can we document, improve, automate our SOPs or workflows or processes, making sure that we are making much more in terms of productivity for the same level of output that we're getting in the first place, right? So do you have any compensation structure as well? What does your bonus plan look like? And finally, we want to plan the next acquisition channel and brand equity. Instead of purely focusing on 5 to 7 different acquisition channels and dilute ourselves right from the start, we want to go one by one. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you're interested to learn more about how this process could apply for your own business and your own brand, feel free to simply book a call via the link in the description to speak with our team, and we'll be in touch.